Hello and welcome. This is News Now. I'm Shibani Gharat, and it is that time of the year again when high-level participants from business, government and policy making converge in the ski town of Davos in Switzerland for the annual meeting. The World Economic Forum is one of the most anticipated global events where global issues like economic disparity, trade investments, climate change and technology are discussed in great detail. More than 200 sessions will tackle a wide range of issues. India, being the fastest growing economy in the world, is seeing the stage to shape up the global economic narrative. Now let's get you some important voices from Davos. Times Network's Mihir Bhatt spoke with Saadia Zahidi, Senior Managing Director at WEF, and discussed a whole host of subjects such as artificial intelligence, employment, and the need for economic cooperation amid tariff wars. Listen in.
Quarter of all jobs that will go through some kind of churn, and it's a net positive, right? So we're expecting that there will be more jobs than less, but at the same time it's a big churn as a large number of jobs get displaced and a large number of jobs get created. Now there isn't a one-to-one match between those that will lose their jobs and those that can move into those new jobs. That's going to require a massive amount of reskilling and retraining. And again, it won't be a one-to-one match. There will be a need for moving people who will lose some of their current roles into adjacent roles, and there will be a need to massively bring talent into the new roles that will be created in this sort of broader new economy. Now, what is that new economy? It's certainly not just technology and artificial intelligence. It's also stemming from geoeconomic changes and what that is doing to jobs. It's stemming from the energy transition and the broad shift towards sustainability and green. That's also leading to a whole new set of skills. And then, of course, there's some changes that are coming because of demographics. For countries that are aging, require much more healthcare than they did before. Countries that are growing require much more education than they did before. So those are the four big factors that are leading to shifts in the future of jobs.
Obviously, there is a very strong belief that India has a demographic advantage. And I mean, we also, in fact, add one more layer of democratic dividend to, how India is evolving. But every year, millions of people enter workforce. Do you think India is doing enough to upskill them, skill them, and tackle the emerging scenario thanks to AI and geoeconomics?
So I think demographics is an opportunity, but it's not a guaranteed destiny. And I think that is where much more focus needs to go into actually preparing people. Now, as I mentioned, in India, I think that is really starting to happen, this recognition that for this massive economy to live up to its full potential, it needs to ensure that then all the people within it need to live up to their full potential. And with the massive workforce of young people that's coming into the economy every month, every year, that will require a lot more focus on skilling and training. And India has some, of course, very bright spots when it comes to the growth that it's seen in its ICT industry over the last years. But here's an opportunity to now, for example, couple up technology with agriculture and turn, for example, agriculture into a much more higher value add sector. Similarly with healthcare, similarly with education. So there's a lot that can be done in a domestic economy that leverages the demographics quite differently.
Right. Saadia, I want to bring in the concept of globalization. It is going through a sea change. In fact, the whole thing is turning upside down right now. And we are seeing that nations are far more comfortable dealing with other nations bilaterally rather than looking at a global platform or global scenario. In that kind of an environment, the benefits of a globalized economy and growth become that much more difficult or challenging. And how does an emerging economy like India deal with that? Because India was heavily dependent on, I mean, if I have to give an example, let's say H1B. Now suddenly, there's this whole concern about how it will play out going forward.
Yeah. So I'll point to two things. One is the problem, which is that geoeconomic confrontation is the number one risk in our latest global risk report that we just launched a few days ago. Following very closely interstate armed conflict. So overall, people are worried about geoeconomics and geopolitics, but when you dig a little deeper, what they're specifically worried about is, yes, tariffs, but also investment screening, control of critical resources, talent mobility, as you just pointed out. So there's definitely all of that concern. But the second element is, for most developing economies, it is extremely clear that economic cooperation has been a pathway to growth, and it has brought benefits for the last 30 years to their populations. So there isn't that same impetus for economic nationalism that we've seen in some of the advanced economies, and that is exactly why you're seeing this rise in bilateral trade agreements. In fact, we asked our chief economist community, we said to them, what is their prediction for how economic cooperation will play out? And over 93% of them believe that we're going to see a massive rise in bilateral and minilateral trade agreements. And that is a reflection of a continued desire for most of the world to continue economic cooperation. And I think that is a very good thing, including for jobs.
Well, we're getting you all the action from Davos, and Times Network's Mihir Bhatt also sits down with World Economic Forum MD Mirek Dusek to discuss major shifts in the global economy, trends in growth, evolving geopolitics, trade resilience, and what the future holds for markets worldwide. Listen in.
No, you're right that we are seeing major shifts in the world economy, and one thing that has become quite prominent is that there's just more government in the economy. If we look at just how much industrial policy now there is in economies, obviously there are also measures around trade where we see, of course, tariffs now being deployed as a tool, which is something that if we look again in recent history, some of these concepts and policy tools were not used or were used not as much. So things are really changing. And we do have record participation. You could argue that it is true that at a time of uncertainty, the need to engage with your peers, if you're a CEO, with your peers, just how they navigate this uncertainty and also opportunity, but also with the policymakers. The quick pace of that dialogue is important. Some people would say that the playbooks that CEOs had over the past 2 decades are no longer fit for purpose. And so a lot of those new playbooks and new knowledge is being created through dialogue. And so I think there is this this function that I think we try to be helpful with. Now, companies, we have, as I said, about 1,700 business leaders overall. You see a shift. So when we see what is of interest to them, how they engage in Davos, but also elsewhere through our work, you see that geopolitical matters are of more importance. You also see companies equipping themselves with teams and with the right knowledge to be able to navigate this landscape. But I would also say that it is not only the geopolitical picture that's top of mind. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there is the other transformative force, which is that we are living through quite an unprecedented period of innovation that is then deployed across industry and society. So those would be the two forces that are for sure top of mind for business leaders, at least as we can see.
Right. Mirek, also, I mean, countries like India, which are obviously it's the fastest growing large economy. We have a large presence here. A lot of corporates and Indian states are also participating here. In a fragmented world, do you think that the onus of keeping the spirit of globalization intact is heavily dependent on countries like India and other emerging economies?
No, India plays a major role in the world economy. It's one of the fastest growing economies right now in the world. We have a number of sessions that are actually dedicated. There is one that we are specifically looking how can India become the third largest economy in the world, which is a packed session with ministers and heads of companies. We've said here that for sure the world economy is changing, is being rewired. People have been talking about how supply chains are being reshuffled. I think we're at a situation where if you look at how companies are dealing with it, we have actually a session here on has the dust settled on what the new architecture of trade and supply chains will be. And it's not fully settled, but you could argue that the contours of the new trade routes and the new types of trade agreements that may be also then including agreements around minerals, they would be including agreements around data. So also the shape of trade is changing. And so in that mix, a dynamic economy like in India, a major economy in the world, it plays, of course, a major role. And we see some of these phenomena also playing out in terms of what kind of investments you see coming into India and what kind of projects are being announced.
Absolutely. And Times Network's Mihir Bhatt also speaks with World Economic Forum President and CEO Borge Brende on global growth, geopolitics, trade resilience, and how AI investment is shaping a cautiously optimistic economic outlook. He also spoke on weaponization of trade with tariffs. Listen in.
Today, one of the challenges that any large global corporate is facing is they are continuously getting dragged into geoeconomics and geopolitics, and they have to shift their business strategy, they have to shift their supply lines. I mean, if you look at the count of number of corporates who have exited from China and vice versa, it's really a concern. So, I mean, what is your view on that as World Economic Forum?
We can look at it as glass half full or half empty. We were expecting much more of a slowing of the global growth than we have seen. This year we expect a little bit more than 3%. It's not like trend growth closer to 4% we had for decades, but with all the geopolitical turmoil, it's not bad. Trade used to be the engine of growth, and trade grew twice as much as the global growth. That, I think, is not happening in the years to come. But what we're seeing now, the trade is still growing. It's growing around 3%. So it's not stopping. So we are trading more with each other, we respect this year than we did last year. So that is important to remind ourselves about. And secondly, on top of this, we have $1.5 trillion being invested in AI last year. This will continue also this year. So a year ago, I would have been worried that we could see a decade of slow growth like in the 1970s. If there's no major wars and escalations with the new technologies, we could possibly also, if you want to look at the bright side of life, and that's also something we need to do, we can see decades of high growth because of the investments in the new technologies, increased productivity and all this. So I'm torn, but moving a bit more to the bullish side than the bearish side on the global economy.
Are you concerned, Borge, about, for the lack of a better word, weaponization of trade or weaponization of tariff between countries? Are you concerned about that? Because it's in direct conflict with the spirit of globalization.
Since the start of the 1990s, we have had this globalization for 30 years. It doubled the global GDP. The extreme poverty in the world went from 40% to 10%. So it gave its benefits. But they also had challenges related to it. For example, many blue-collar workers in already industrialized countries and middle class got competition from emerging economies they didn't have before. You have to look at it in a broader historic context. Trade has always been fluctuating. We have been through a period of a lot of trade and opening of borders. Now we're in a different situation where also post-COVID, countries are not only thinking about just in time, but also just in case. So they're strengthening their supply chains. And then you have on top of it this friendshoring that some countries only want to then trade basically with friends, what they define as friends. But that's also very complicated because, as I said, with US and China, they're already so interlinked. I think the same with the US and India are very interlinked. But that process of negotiations are still going on. And I thought by Davos that would have been solved. But let's see.
Well, more exciting conversations to come on the other side of this break, but I'm afraid we have to slip into a very short break right now. You don't go anywhere. We will be right back.